massive session on growing economies, and we're also thinking within this indicators of growth. So firstly, growing economies, so the growing economic power of those emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil, Mexico and Turkey, well, they are important for UK businesses because UK GDP growth rates have been slowing over time and they are much slower than those emerging economies, and they have been for well over a decade. So that poses a question for UK businesses. They could export to these emerging economies, they could offshore production to these emerging economies. But within that, there are opportunities and there are, of course, risks. Now, I've dealt with that in a separate video, the cards up there. The next thing we need to move on to is the indicators of growth. So UK businesses are looking to export or offshore production to these emerging economies. Here are some of the indicators they might think about. Now, one indicator that isn't here is GDP. And again, the card's up there for GDP. But GDP per capita, well, that is total GDP divided by population. And that estimates the average economic output per person in a country. Now, this indicator is, of course, a good indicator of standard of living within a country, and generally, the higher the GDP per capita, the higher the standard of living. But of course, within that, there are discrepancies, such as it doesn't account for pollution, it doesn't account for inequality and so forth. So there are gaps within that. But generally speaking, the higher the GDP per capita, the higher the standard of living. Now, if you're a business and you're looking at these indicators of growth, you'd see GDP per capita as perhaps an indicator as the market size that could be on offer in that particular economy or that country. Or it's a way to judge the purchasing power of the individuals that live in that country in terms of buying your product and whether you should export into that country. Now, the second of the indicators of growth is literacy rates. So we're thinking here the percentage of the population that can read or write. Or it could be much more advanced, and it could be looking at education levels, maybe the levels of a certain degree or degrees in general. Now, this is again an indicator of the level of development or progress within a society or economy. And it's going to be useful from a business perspective in terms of offshoring, because it's likely the higher the literacy rate, well, that would mean there's probably more of a skilled workforce there who are better able to learn processes, perhaps new tech processes, as we've seen that rapid change in technology over these recent years. On top of that, it might look at the quality of the workers. It's a good way to make that judgment. Now, the next is health. So health will be looking at life expectancy rates, it could be looking at infant mortality rates, it could be looking at something as simple as the percentage of doctors that exist. Now, here is a good judge of, in terms of healthcare and running a healthy population, of the workforce's productivity, particularly if you're thinking about offshoring into that country. It can also, from an exporting point of view, look at the potential of the market. Now, the final one is HDI, the Human Development Index. And this is an index that was developed by the United Nations Development Programme, and it's there to examine economic development within a country. And essentially there's three factors to it, and you get a score at the end. I'll go with the score at the end. So the score you'll get at the end is between 0 and 1. 0 is the lowest you can score, 1 is the highest you can score. So the nearer you are to 1 suggests there is a good level of economic development in that economy. 0 means there's limited or no economic development. Now, the three factors that help you calculate HDI are health, so we're looking at here a life expectancy of birth. We're looking at education, so the expected years of schooling that each individual will have within that economy. And then thirdly is the standard of living. Standard of living, we're thinking about GNI per capita, which is annoying because it's slightly different to GDP per capita that's in the spec. And that is essentially it's a very similar thing. The only difference really, or the core difference, is that with GNI, it accounts for individuals and firms' earnings from abroad, whether GDP per capita does not account for that. Anyway, so I hope that helps, and I'll see you at the next sesh.